at The Sun, and also with me, author of Politico's London Playbook, Stefan Boscher, with me to look through the papers this morning. So very good morning to both of you. Really one story in town across the front pages. This, obviously, the big blow-up at the Oval Office last night between President Trump and President Zelensky, and JD Vance as well, of course. So, where to start? Let's start with the Times. A lot of the papers treat this in a very similar way. Their headline, Meltdown in Oval Office. And they really were extraordinary scenes that has raised so many questions about what happens next.
Absolutely, and it was such a made-for-TV moment that in many ways is really fitting for the Donald Trump presidency, right? I mean, I think a lot of people
He even said at one point, this would make amazing television or something.
Exactly, that's the way he closed it. I mean, I think that the way he does diplomacy is so bizarre, and I think that Zelensky, in some ways, maybe lent into it too much. It was such a heightened atmosphere, and while we don't want to blame Zelensky because he came in there and was, as a person who was leading a country under attack, under a siege by an imperial aggressor, he was factually and morally in the right. But I don't think he maybe handled it the right way, and maybe he needed to be more, he needed to deal with Trump more with kid gloves, the way that Keir Starmer did, even if that feels morally wrong. It probably is pragmatically the thing to do.
Well, yes, there was a lot of talk during the week about President Macron's visit and Prime Minister Keir Starmer's visit just the day before to the Oval Office, and a lot of talk about how they've been coached to flatter Donald Trump, to push back on factual stuff, but not too hard. And it seemed to go well for those leaders, but for President Zelensky, whose country has been invaded, he obviously just couldn't keep calm under provocation.
Yeah, I mean, what a grim spectacle the entire scene was. And it was really interesting to see that contrast between how Starmer handled Trump versus Zelensky. Obviously, Starmer is nowhere near under as much pressure as Zelensky in that, I mean, I was in Kiev last week, and every 5 minutes there was a notification on the phone to run to a bomb shelter because you've got a Shahid drone above you. He's under so much pressure. So I understand, you know, that it is more difficult to play the real ultimate diplomat card in the way that Starmer did. But I do think Stefan does have a point that perhaps the better option for him was to play it cool as much as possible. And yeah, just going back to your point, Anna, it was so, in a way, it was kind of odd seeing Starmer talk to the sort of commander-in-chief, the leader of the free world, as if he was a puppy dog, like, here you go, I've got this letter, it's from the king. Whereas Zelensky just did not have it in him to maintain that
reflecting
demeanour.
on that briefly, let's bring in one of the other papers because they are all of a similar bent. The Sun, for example, they call it the Fight House. And Stefan, just very briefly on the issue of Keir Starmer, will people view that visit to the White House slightly differently now in this context?
There's no doubt. I think people already in Westminster yesterday were saying, well, after all that, what did you actually gain from it and what did you actually achieve? Despite all the nice words between Starmer and Trump, the next day, the peace talks have already blown up into a situation where you need mediation between the leaders having the peace talks. And Starmer got on the phone straight away last night to both President Trump and President Zelensky. And he's already in the position of having to completely, him and other European leaders, having to completely mend this situation. So you do look back on what was a lot of backslapping on Thursday in the White House and a lot of, you know, nice words between Trump and Starmer, but they all seem to mean very little. It was a lot of talk without actual any meaning.
Well, yeah, and let's move on to the Daily Mail. They call it a spectacle to horrify the world, Noah. And the big question is, what happens next? What is the response going to be? We've seen European allies of Ukraine coming in support very swiftly. We've also seen Keir Starmer coming in with a statement saying that he's spoken both to Trump and Zelensky and still continues to support Ukraine. But what happens next?
Well, I agree with Stefan's point around a lot of questions being raised from this insane meeting about what Starmer actually achieved. I think one thing he did achieve and one thing that could be crucial in the coming days in unravelling this mess is that Donald Trump respects Keir Starmer and there is a line of communication. At the moment, that's completely broken between Ukraine and the US, but the UK, because of Trump's very unexpected, I suppose, fondness of Starmer. That line of communication, which is critical, is there. And Starmer has Zelensky's back, as the whole of Europe does. We saw that last night after the big bust-up. We had all the European leaders coming out to voice their support for Ukraine on X. It was interesting. Starmer didn't do it directly. He had a number 10 spokesperson do it for him. But I think that was strategic in his thinking that I will maintain Starmer's fondness of me so I can keep this line of communication going. And I think what happens...
Trump's, you mean? Trump's fondness of Starmer, yeah.
And so tomorrow will then be critical because what will happen is all these European leaders will come to London and they'll be wargaming the next move. But they've got the communication, that's important.
This summit that's being held and hosted by Keir Starmer tomorrow with European leaders coming to it. And he very much pitched himself as he went out to Washington as a potential bridge between Europe and America on the issue of Ukraine, and obviously a great deal of concern about whether America will withdraw its military support and perhaps, if there is a ceasefire deal struck, wouldn't act as the ultimate security backstop. I mean, do you think that role as a bridge can still continue to work now?
I think it can. And I think the fact that, Keir Starmer was one of the first people, if not the first person on the phone to the president straight after those talks, does show that he has made some inroads on this. And I think actually this is one area where being outside the EU does have some benefit, because we heard throughout the whole press conference, or large chunks of the press conference on Thursday between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, his willingness, the president, to attack the EU, to say that, in his words, that the EU was made to screw the US. The fact that the Keir Starmer sits outside that forum now means that we do have a role there, I think, to play to get his ear, to sort of talk him down on some of these issues. But I think that the summit tomorrow, it's quite a sad situation, because instead of actually talking these real issues of substance, issues about what the peacekeeping force looks like, what potential US security guarantees could be for America, all we're going to be talking about, and all the media will be talking about, is personality politics and this, really visceral, grim scene we saw in the White House.
Quick look at the I newspaper, similar headline, but I note they quote a security source saying the world has changed in the last 90 minutes. That was the 90 minutes in the Oval Office. We only have 10 seconds, but obviously Russia watching closely all the while.
Yes, I mean, the person who will come out the happiest of this entire grim scene is obviously Vladimir Putin. And I think already Europe had a big wake-up call with the election of Trump, but this is yet another one.
Yes. See you in an hour. Thanks both very much. We're out of time.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered.